These are 10 Boss RC-600 features that you need to know when setting up your new loop station. Whether you are upgrading from another loop pedal or this is your first ever one, this video will help you get the most out of your latest purchase. So we're finally doing another Boss RC-600 tutorial today and breaking down some of the key features that you need to know about. It's been a bit of time since I made the last one. I've kind of been preoccupied traveling all over the world making technology videos for what is now my main YouTube channel that's kind of taken over my entire life and is quite intense in terms of the filming schedule. But I'm finally back making some more music videos, which I'm super excited about. First, let's take a look at how you update the firmware on your Boss RC-600. When you get this bad boy straight out the box, depending on where you got your unit, it may have a very old firmware on there if it's been in the warehouse for ages, which means it could have a few glitches on it. When this loop station first came out, it wasn't the most stable. It was freezing, it was crashing. A lot of the features didn't even work when you enabled or disabled them. So you 100% want to make sure that you update this, even if you bought a brand new one that seems like it's relatively new, or you've purchased an old one off somebody who never updated the firmware. This is an essential step. In addition to this, with the latest firmware that came out only a few months ago, Boss introduced a whole load of new features and functionality on the RC-600, which gives you even more unique features from this already fairly capable machine. So to check what version of firmware you actually have, you want to hold down the menu button and turn the loop station on. Right here, it will break down the exact build number and firmware number that's currently loaded in on your looper pedal. You can then head on over to the Boss official website to see what the latest firmware is, of which I actually need to update mine, where you will then be able to see whether you need to actually update the loop station or whether it is ready to rock and roll, along with the new features and bug fixes that are introduced with that latest firmware update. If you do need to update the firmware, you want to go ahead and install the system program onto your PC or Mac, and then you'll connect via the USB port at the rear of the RC-600, plug this into your computer. But first, hold down the exit button, then power on the unit to enable and initiate the updater. This will then connect the RC-600 to your laptop and essentially turn the RC-600 into a storage device where you can then drag and drop the new firmware onto the RC-600 that will kind of look like an external hard drive when you view it on the desktop on your computer. Once completed, you can then click exit, power down the RC-600, and you're now good to go. Now that was a fairly fast and quick overview of how to do the updating process, but if you want to see an exact step-by-step guide with a full tutorial that's much slower and takes you through the entire process so you don't miss any of the key steps, be sure to check out the link down below in the video description for my Boss RC-600 Ultimate Guide. Inside of this class, you get over 2.5 hours of on-demand video, which totals over 45 videos organized into 10 separate modules covering every single setting on the Boss RC-600. It covers literally everything that you need to know about this device, which will help save you time and frustration so you don't have to go through that abysmal Boss manual, which doesn't really explain much and confuses you more than anything. I'll leave a link to this down below in the video description, but without further ado, let's get on to the rest of the tips. So first, let me explain exactly how this loop station works straight out of the box and the various different pedal modes. As soon as you boot this thing up, every single time, it will default to pedal mode 1, which is signified by the white LED light on the track select button. Pedal mode 1 will only give you access to the first 3 loop tracks in its default state, essentially like a Boss RC-300. So with the Boss RC-300, the old version of this loop station, this of course is only a 3-track loop station, but you have a dedicated record play foot switch for each loop track along with a stop foot switch for each of those loop tracks. So essentially you have 3 different loop pedals, almost Boss RC-30s, just bang, bang, bang. Dead simple way to operate it. Lovely pedal, works an absolute treat. Now, straight out of the box, the Boss RC-600 operates in that exact same manner, although it looks a little bit more confusing because you don't have the segregation lines here between them. So you've got record, play, stop for track 1. So I'll click play, and then that'll be the stop button for loop track 1. Then we've got loop track 2, operates the same. This is its dedicated stop switch. Track 3 operates the same. This is its dedicated stop switch. So this operates just like a Boss RC-300. But of course, if you purchased the Boss RC-600, you'll know it's a 6-track loop station. You'll be thinking, well, how do I access my other 6 loop tracks that I have paid good money for? May as well have just got the RC-300. Well, this is where the track select foot switch is your best friend. You press this bad boy and it switches you over to pedal mode 2, which is essentially a second Boss RC-300. But this time, we're going to access track 4, track 5, and also track 6. So now we've got the exact same setup, but we can switch between bank 1 and bank 2 of those different loop tracks. So that's how pedal mode 1 and 2 operate straight out of the box, which you can completely customize, but we'll get onto that in a moment. To access pedal mode 3, you're going to press and hold the effects foot switch for a couple of seconds and it will turn blue. Now we have got access to enabling and disabling our various different effects built into the RC-600, which actually are very usable. The RC-600 and Boss RC-505 Mark II actually have very beautiful effects built into the unit itself that you can actually use in a performance without sounding cringy, especially compared to the Boss RC-300. This thing had built-in effects, but they were bloody awful to put it politely. They weren't very usable. They sounded like they were from the 90s. Now, using our foot switches in mode 3, we can enable our track effects signified by these LED lights turning purple and red and so on, to show which effect is currently selected and then whether it's on or whether it's off. Now, obviously, this ain't much use because you're thinking, great, Ben, what if I turn the wrong effect on or off? Don't really know which effect is which. It's just a lot of colorful lights. Absolutely correct. Now, luckily, with the display in the top left corner, we have got a lot of different information that we can gather from the RC-600 depending on your preference when actually performing. Now, using these two arrow keys here, page left and right, we can change what this display is showing. This is your current loop state, the progress of each of the loops. This is one of my favorite views, to be honest. But if we keep going, we can go all the way over to input effects and also output effects. There's two different options for your track effects. Now we can monitor which effects are enabled and disabled, and likewise which track effects are on and off, and we can monitor all of this from these two screens right here. Now, of course, you can customize the effects beyond this point, switch them out, change the parameters within this menu further, but I'm not going to talk about that within this video. So now that you understand that you've got these three different pedal modes that you can alternate between, now let me show you how you can reassign some of these foot switches to actually maximize the amount of space that you have access currently to. Now, of course, this is a 6-track loop station, so we potentially would want to access all 6 loop tracks at the exact same time without having to switch between pedal mode 2 and 1 with this button right here. So what we can do is we can actually reassign each of these foot switches to have a different record play functionality. So right now, foot switch 1 is record, play, overdub, and then foot switch 2 is stop. And that's it. Now, this is a wasted foot switch because we're not going to be stopping too much, and we could of course assign the stop command to this single foot switch. So what we could do instead is actually set up this loop station foot switch to be record, play, overdub, double tap it, and it will stop. That would then free up this dedicated stop switch to do something else. So if we were to do that for all 6 foot switches, we would have record, play, double tap to stop, record, play, overdub, double tap to stop, double tap to stop, double tap to stop, and so on. We could then have access to all 6 of our loop tracks, bang, straight away in pedal mode 1, which then means in pedal mode 2, it frees up all of these 6 foot switches to do something else completely different that you may also want to customize within the memory bank settings. It's crazy, the customization on the RC-600. So let me show you how you do this for the first couple of foot switches, and then you can repeat the process and dive into it further. Or alternatively, check out my guide link down below in the video description for detailed tutorials on all of this, where we can break things down way better than we can on YouTube because of time restrictions. So on Boss Loop Stations, there are multiple different types of menus depending on the category of parameter that you're trying to change. So your system settings are often found within the master menu. These are usually global parameters that change across every single memory bank on the looper pedal. You then got what used to be referred to as your track settings, which are track specific for loop track 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. They're now referred to as loop. That menu has changed on the newer loop stations. And then of course, you've also got your rhythm settings for all of your onboard drum sections, metronomes, and different aspects such as time signatures. Let me just quickly show you some of the things you can access within the loop settings or track settings. But right now, we don't want to change any of our track settings. We actually want to dive into the master menu and scroll over to the second page and go into control functions. Here you can see you've got pedal mode 1, 2, and 3, which is referring to what we just explored here. Let's jump into pedal mode 1, and here we can customize pedals 1 all the way through to 9. So you can keep scrolling, it'll take you all the way through to pedal 9, which is this start-stop switch right here. Let's jump onto pedal 1, select it with this knob here by pressing it in. You can see right now, pedal 1 is set to do track 1, record, play, which will be record, play, and then if you hold it, it will do an undo, and then if you double tap it, it will do a stop. So that is already set up how we want it from a prior tutorial. You're by default maybe set to play 1, which must be record play, or record play undo if you press and hold it. But you've obviously got this undo button here as well, which I think is a little bit pointless. So let's change the functionality of pedal 1, this one right here. Right now, this is currently set to track 1, record play, but you can see right here it says play 1. There's actually 4 different variations of the play modes that you can access, and each of these is an additional command depending on your preference when playing the pedal. So straight out the box, it will just be record play, and then it'll overdub. So record play, overdub. So you just keep recording on this foot switch, and then you use this second foot switch to stop. And then if you want to do any undo commands, you'd use this undo redo button, which in my opinion, I think is a little bit clunky and unnecessary. So we'll change this to do something completely different as well. So depending on what you would like, you can try out the different styles of 1, but I personally would try either record play 3 or record play 4. In record play 3, what will happen is the loop station will record, it'll then play back, and then if you can overdub on it, no problem whatsoever. Then if you press and hold, it will undo, and then if you press and hold it again, it will redo, and then if you double tap, it will stop. But if we were to switch this out into record play 4, this time it will record, it will then play, it'll overdub, it'll do its undo redos if you want it to do that. You can then double tap it to stop, but this time you can also press and hold it, and it will initiate a clear command. That could be useful for you, but it could also be dangerous because you might accidentally clear your loop tracks in the middle of a performance. So I personally prefer to use record play mode 3, and I can clear things off in a slightly different way by reassigning some of these buttons in the top right. You then want to go ahead and repeat this process for pedal 2. Change this from being a stop command, change it to be track 2. Record play. So we'll just keep scrolling, scrolling, and scrolling. We'll change that to be track 2, record play, stop, obviously track play, record play 3, and then we do the same for this foot switch. We'd exit out, go to pedal mode 4, switch this out to be track play, record play, etc. And you would repeat this process for each of the pedals, which would then give you access to all of your loop tracks on one single bank. Then from here, you can go ahead and dive into pedal mode 4. And now you've got 9 pedals to do whatever you like with, because you don't need these for loop track 4, 5, and 6 anymore, because you can access that in pedal mode 1. And here you can go to town. You could switch this out to be all sorts of different things. You can scroll through and you can have a little look at all the different things. If you press and hold on the encoder as well, it'll skip between settings faster. Instead of it going track 5, every single track 5 setting, you can press and hold it and it'll skip between track 5, 6, 4 much faster. So you can sort of see some of the other stuff you could access on your second bank, and it's all personal preference from this point. You can find exactly what you want to access in pedal mode 2. And then you can do the same for pedal mode 3, or you could leave pedal mode 3 just for controlling your effects like it's meant to be. Insane customization right here. You can spend hours and hours tinkering with this to find exactly what you like. If you want to learn more about custom controller signs, again, I've got dedicated videos inside of the Ultimate Guide that takes you through this process and also shows you how to set up external foot controllers and MIDI foot controllers, which is way more advanced if you don't have enough foot switches already on this looper station and you need even more. The link to that is down below in the video description. Next, let me show you a super easy setting that you can change to make this loop station just a little bit less annoying to use. Now, a lot of people agree with me, a lot of people also disagree. That's the world. I ain't angry about that. But this light right here is super annoying. For me personally, it literally gives you a headache while you use the pedal. I do not need this information. It tells you how fast the tempo currently is. So if I tap something in crazy, it will speed up. If I tap something super slow in, it will obviously slow down. Press and hold that for a couple seconds. It will reset the tempo back to what this patch currently is defaulted at. I don't find this information useful whatsoever. The light flashes just way too quick that you can't really process what it's doing. I don't believe it helps anybody keep time. It just flashes way too fast. And then the bulb goes out, goes in. It just isn't responsive enough compared to actually just counting and hearing it. In my personal opinion, it's too big. So if you want to switch this out, either turn it off or have it do something completely different, dive into the master menu, scroll over to setup, which is on the 3rd page. In the setup menu right here, we can access different stuff to change how this orb and also loop light indicator operates, signified by these 2 at the end. If we change out the loop light indicator, we can have this show the progress of the loop. We can have it show the tempo of the loop, so it flashes as well. We can have it show what the rhythm track currently is doing. Lots of different stuff. I like all of the different modes you can access inside of here. But what I don't like is this orb on the tempo. Mate, I do not like it. So we can turn this off, so it shows if the rhythm's on or off. So the rhythm track's currently on, the rhythm track's currently off. That's useful, does the job. Or you can have it signify what the loop's doing. So are we recording? Are we playing back? Are we overdubbing? Are we playing back? This is probably my favorite mode for it in my personal opinion, but you can play about, see what you like. But yeah, set it to loop and it's a solid color. On the topic of some further loop settings that you can alternate, tweak, change, we've got loop quantize. Loop quantize is another controversial setting as to whether you should use this or not, just like the orb light indicator. So don't hate me in the comments if you disagree with what I'm about to say. So essentially what loop quantization is, it will effectively lock your loop into a grid, a bit like with logic. If you were to quantize MIDI, it will just lock it to the grid to ensure that it is perfectly in time. Now loop quantization is very useful for just if you're doing multi-length loops. So one of the great features about the RC-600, a bit like the older Boss RC-505 as well, you can loop at multiple different measure lengths. So loop 1 could be 4 measures long, loop 2 could be 2 measures long, and loop 3 could be 16 measures long. So this allows you to be very efficient with how fast you build up your loop tracks. So you don't have to be there doing a drum beat, boom, 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 for like 30 measures just to match the longest length of the loop. You could do it for 2 measures, boom, 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 job done. But what this means is you may potentially want to enable loop quantize to make sure all of those loops stay in sync. Now, yes, there is also something called loop sync, which does that job, but loop quantize will just ensure that any margins of errors are corrected by the onboard system. So if you press this loop switch a millisecond faster than the other loop switch, it will just make sure that it is a perfect 4-bar measure or a perfect 2-bar measure and not a 1.96 loop bar measure. So then it obviously phases out F-sync. With loop quantize on, it then makes sure all of these loop tracks are locked into what the onboard tempo and rhythm section is currently doing. Ours is obviously set to 131 BPM. So it will make sure all of the loops lock to that grid and they play in tandem with one another. You can access this setting within your loop. You can go into each loop track, as I said before, and you can go into your record settings. And then you have the option to turn this on or off, and you can see it will quantize to the nearest measure. Again, you've got the flexibility to turn this on and off for each loop track. So if you did want loop track 6, for example, to be completely unrelated to the onboard tempo and sync on this loop station, you can do that. So you could turn off loop sync, you could turn off quantization and everything, so that is just a 100% free time loop. That's useful for a bridge section or a breakdown if you get the audience involved and then you want to cut it out and go straight back to your locked off grids, but you just want it to be more free and spontaneous in the moment. So you can turn all of these assists off and make that completely independent for whichever loop tracks you want to do that for. Jumping back into some of the reassign settings that we have access to, I want to show you something that will save you a lot of time when it comes to clearing off your loop station. Now, of course, this loop pedal has got a lot of loop tracks, 6, and you want to probably clear those off in a very efficient and fast manner when you are on stage. So if you go into our controller signs, let's take pedal mode 1, because we're currently in that one. We could reassign some of these pedals up here to do something different. So pedal 9 will be our all start and all stop, and pedal 8 is currently undo/redo. So we could reassign undo/redo, because we ain't using that, because these are undo/redo if we press and hold on them, to do something completely different. So for example, we could scroll around and have this do clear. So if we have a little scroll about to try and find it, we can find a setting that will act as our all clear. And we've got 2 different variations of all clear. One is press and one is also hold. So for example, if we were to press this right now, it does nothing. But if we were to press and hold it, it clears everything off. Whereas if we would have it to press and we recorded a couple of loops, that would clear straight away. My personal preference is press and hold, because again, it just protects you and safeguards you from any margins of error. If you're on stage and accidentally press the all clear button instead of the all start stop button, performance is over. Whereas if you have to press and hold it for 2 seconds, it means, oh, I pressed the wrong button. Now press the right button and you haven't completely destroyed your song. Again, personal preference, whichever you prefer. That's how I would set it up. Now, if that's a little bit too complex for you to set up, or you want to use this foot switch for something else, luckily for you, there is something called Quick Clear that's way faster and easier to enable. On the RC-600, we've got this all start stop foot switch. This, of course, starts all of our loops simultaneously and stops all of our loops simultaneously. But we can toggle a setting on that will also mean this can clear all of our loops simultaneously if we press and hold it. If we go into our master menu, scroll over to the right, go to control functions, and scroll over to the final page, which is preferences, there's this parameter right at the end called all clear that you can turn on or off. Straight out the box, it's turned off, which means if we press and hold this foot switch, it doesn't do anything. It just stops, starts, doesn't do anything. If we enable it, if we press and hold the all start stop foot switch, it will clear off all of our loops. This is super useful and an awesome way to just clear the decks super fast and easy, whilst also keeping the undo/redo pedal 8 free to do something else. So you can change this out to do something else. I would personally probably run Quick Clear over what I showed you before, but at least you know both ways to set something like this up. So far in this video, I have shown you quite a lot of different settings on this loop station. So next, I want to show you how you can correctly save these changes onto the onboard memory. Otherwise, you're just going to lose them all as soon as you change onto a different patch. Boom, they're all gone. So the way that you do this is very simple, and also it's important to understand which settings need saved and which settings don't. As I previously mentioned in this video, there are different menu systems on this loop station. You've got your system settings menu, you've got your loop track settings, and also you've got your rhythm settings. Things like your track settings and rhythm settings are memory bank specific. So that means every time you change to a new memory bank, those settings will change and they need to be saved. Whereas most of the settings inside of the master menu are system settings, which means as soon as you change them, they're applied across every single preset on the loop station. Some, are, some aren't, but 90% of them are, so you don't need to save those. So for example, our previous tip was the quick clear. If we have this enabled, this is enabled across all 99 preset banks, regardless of which one's loaded in and regardless of if we've saved it. If I were to toggle this off, that's now disabled across every single memory bank, regardless of if we have saved it. So that is an example of a system setting. It's a global parameter that changes instantly. If you're changing things within your loop tracks and your memory settings, if you don't save those, as soon as you change over to a new bank, they're gone forever and you're gonna have to set them up again. So in order to save your changes, you wanna press both of these buttons at the same time, exit and enter, and this will take you into the right screen. Here you have the option to write or clear. Obviously, if you press clear, that will wipe it off. If you press write, this will go ahead and save it to the onboard memory. Then from here, you can choose its save destination. So if you did make this on a preset 16, but you actually want to save it onto preset 6, you could change its write location. So save as, it's gonna save onto a different memory bank, regardless of the memory bank that you've created it on. Make sure you don't overwrite something on a different memory bank though. And then you just wanna go ahead and click enter to write it to the onboard memory, and it will execute the command. This is now saved onto our loop station. Now, the final thing that you need to know about are the external foot controllers that you can use with your RC-600. One of my favorite features of the latest generation of Boss loop stations is the ability to add up to 2 external expression pedals or external foot controllers. On all the loop stations, you were limited to just 1 external controller, and that was either an expression pedal or a foot switch, whereas at least now you can have foot switch and also an expression pedal to give you much more control, or have 2 expression pedals or have 2 external foot switches. An external foot switch is a great way to just add further button commands, and also if you are playing on stage or you have a huge live looping setup like I have in the past, you can scatter these foot switches around the stage so you can access it at different points. If you want to walk away from your pedals to go do a guitar solo or to go to a different instrument, you can have some foot switches located over there so you can still have the control over the loop tracks that you need to in that particular moment, and then come back to your main performance station with the master pedal. Awesome to just add a bit of dynamics and also ease of use to your setup. You can set these up very easily by using a balanced TRS jack cable, the ones with the 2 rings on. That gives you function over both of the foot switches and you plug them straight into the back. And then just like as I've shown you throughout this video, you dive into your assign menu and you can have up to 16 custom assigns, of which you can assign to the foot switch or to the external MIDI foot controllers that you can also connect up to this thing. I talk about exactly how you can set up all of these external controllers inside of my Boss RC-600 Ultimate Guide, where you can watch over 2.5 hours of video with 45 different tutorials split across 10 different modules that breaks down every single setting in detail on the Boss RC-600 at a slow and steady pace. A lot of people complain that YouTube videos are way too fast paced for them to follow along with. Well, these videos inside of the online guide are much slower paced. The editing's much simpler, and the speed at which the information and also the detail that we go into is way easier to consume. So you can follow along step by step and get everything configured exactly how you like it. Links to that are down below in the video description, but if you still want to learn about more things that your Boss RC-600 could do, you should 100% check out this video next for 14 of the coolest features that you may not know about. But as always, I've been Ben Rowlands. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.